Is it just me, or is it getting colder out? I don't know about you, but I'm putting on a lot more long sleeve shirts than I did a couple of months ago. And we need to be dressed for the season. But today's passage speaks of a way that we dress ourselves that's appropriate to all seasons. Welcome back to Dining Room Devos. We're looking today at 1 Peter 5, verse 5. Young men, in the same way, be submissive to those who are older. All of you, clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Peter addresses two different audiences in this one verse. But there's one theme that's consistent in his message to both groups, and that theme is humility. Humility might seem a strange teaching coming from Peter. He wasn't exactly known for humility during Jesus' earthly ministry. It was out of Peter's pride that he didn't want Jesus to wash his feet at the Last Supper. And then later that same evening, it was Peter's desire, a sense for self-protection, and out of his pride that he denied Christ 3 times. But years in leadership taught Peter the value of this most cherished virtue. The first audience that Peter writes to is young men, and he tells them to be submissive to those who are older. Be submissive or be respectful towards older men. We got to remember, though, that Peter's instructions in this verse aren't one-sided. He isn't preferring the older over the younger. He's not telling the young men of the church to sit down and shut up. No, in fact, our last few videos, we've looked at how he has just told the elders, the pastors, who usually were older people in the church, he was telling them to serve, to take on the role of willing servants to the flock, which takes humility. Peter's not commanding humility any more for the younger men than for the older. The way they express this humility, though, is just different. Elders show their humility through their leadership, and younger people show their humility by respecting the age, wisdom, and the spiritual maturity of the older people. It's a shame when you look at churches today that many churches either have older people or younger people, but not always a mix of the two. You're either the traditional church with seasoned believers with no one to share their wisdom with, or you're the hip new church with young people with no older people to teach them important life lessons. A couple years ago, I heard a pastor of one of the hip new churches complaining that the biggest problem he had in his church was that they had all these young people, but they had no older people to learn from. The truth is that we need all generations in the church. So who's the second audience that Peter writes to? I bet you think it's older people, but it's not. The second audience Peter addresses in this verse is everybody. He says this at the end of verse 5, all of you. What does he say? To old and young. He says, clothe yourselves with humility. This is very similar to what Paul says in Colossians 3:12. It says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Paul uses that same language, clothe yourselves. And the Greek there, that's for the words clothe yourselves, refers to slaves who would put on a scarf or an apron in order to distinguish themselves from free men. He's essentially saying that we should wear humility as a lifestyle that other people will recognize. Now, this isn't a kind of clothing that you wear depending on the season, kind of like this sweater that I keep in my office to put on when things get a little bit chilly in the winter. It's not something we put on to keep warm. Instead, putting this on is a choice. And it's a way to mark yourselves as different from others. Other people should see your humility just as clearly as they can see this sweater on me. And we show this clothing, we show this humility, not just to certain people, but to all people. And why? Why is this important? Well, Peter quotes the Greek version of Proverbs 3:34 here. He says, God opposes the proud, or God fights against the proud, but gives grace to the humble. gives grace to the humble. In other words, he gives the humble everything they need. Now, not necessarily everything that their vanity might desire, but everything that we need, God promises to give us if we clothe ourselves with humility. Now, God's grace is never late, and it's always sufficient. Psalm 37:25 says, I was young and now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread. We're promised that if we choose to put on humility, to wear it as a garment, if we clothe ourselves with humility, God will give us the grace that we need. So as we close, question to younger people. Do you have older people in your life whose example and godly life you can learn from? If so, they are a gift to you. Learn from them. Older people, is there a younger person in your life that could use a mentor? Teach them. God has put us in each other's lives for a reason. It's so that we may encourage and support one another. Thanks for watching our video today. Feel free to leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't, share the video with somebody who needs to see it, maybe somebody older or somebody younger than you. We'll see you next time on Dining Room Devos with Pastor Jeff Estep. May God bless you.